Welcome to this evening's discussion, Getting Better with Age, Living Well in an Older Melbourne, brought to you by Melbourne Conversations, the City of Melbourne's free program of public talks and forums. My name's Peter Mayers. I'm contributing editor to the free and high-quality online journal Inside Story. Look it up if you'd like to have a look. And I'm very pleased to be moderating tonight's panel. Please join me in welcoming Sue Hendy, Professor Brian Howe, Marion, Collette Browning and Father Bob Maguire. And I'll introduce them more fully as we dive into the conversation. First of all, though, it gives me great pleasure to invite Councillor Beverley Pinder-Mortimer to say a few words on behalf of our host, the City of Melbourne. Councillor.
Good evening. Thank you, Peter. Before I start, if I could respectfully acknowledge that we are here today on the land of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to elders past and present. Panel, distinguished panel, Father Bob, great, Sue Hendy, gosh, Brian Howe, fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and thank you for being a part of tonight's conversation. This evening we want to know if the old adage rings true. Does life get better with age? Do the added years and experience enhance your appreciation of the present? It's a complex question. And what are your experiences like here in Melbourne? We, of course, have done a great deal of work in recent times on ensuring Melbourne becomes an age-friendly city. As our resident population and daily visitor figures show, they're continuing to grow each day. We're committed to addressing the needs of all these people through our policies and our actions. But what exactly does it mean to be age-friendly? Age-friendly cities is a global movement supported by the World Health Organization. Age-friendly cities addresses the needs, services and priorities of older people. These cities adapt their structures and services to be accessible to and inclusive of older people with varying needs and capacities. And boy, do I know a lot about that. I'm currently caring for my mother, who's just come out of hospital, and her 90-year-old brother. So I'm doing a lot of work in that respect, just not far down from St Kilda Road. The Council, of course, does this through a variety of initiatives and events, including Mind, Body and Soul and the Victorian Seniors Festival. We also strive to provide a comprehensive suite of services such as home and community care programs, living at home assessments and case management programs for residents requiring higher levels of support. It is one thing to declare yourself an age-friendly city and another to actually deliver one to you. That is why we want to hear from you tonight. We want that engagement, we want that conversation happening. You, our residents, our workers and our visitors. So I urge you to become involved, join in the conversation and help us better understand your perspectives. Thank you and enjoy the evening. Thank you.
According to the most recent projections from the Victorian Government, the number of residents of Greater Metropolitan Melbourne aged 70 or over is expected to almost double in the next 20 years. So we're going to go from around 375,000 people aged 70 plus to more than 700,000. To put it another way, the percentage of Melbourne's population aged 70 or over will rise from about 9% today to around 13%. In part, this shift reflects the baby boomer bulge moving through our society. In part, it also reflects the fact that we are living longer. In fact, over the past century or so, we've been gaining 2 years every decade, or 5 hours a day, which is pretty remarkable when you think about it. So if you were a man and you were turning 65 in 1965, you could expect, on average, to live another 12 years. If you're a man turning 65 this year, you can expect to live another 19 years. For a woman, the story is even better. In 1965, a 65-year-old woman could expect to live another 16 years. Now she can expect, on average, to live another 22 years. So this is, in many ways, a good news story. But it's also presenting us with some challenges as well as some opportunities. So our topic tonight is Getting Better with Age, Living Well in an Older Melbourne, and it's a topic that has several dimensions. One is the personal dimension, how we as individuals can hope to make our own lives better as we get older. Another is the general societal dimension, how we as a society get better at dealing with the demographic reality of ageing. And then there's the Melbourne-specific dimension. Melbourne as a city, how can we make this city a better place to live as older residents come to make up an ever greater share of the population? So, to get us underway, I'm going to invite each of our guests to respond to the following question. I'll introduce them each in turn more fully as I do that. And the question will be, what are the best and worst aspects of getting older in Melbourne? Or perhaps of Melbourne getting older, either way you want to take it. I'm going to start with someone who lives and breathes these issues, and that's Sue Hendy, to my immediate right. Sue is the CEO of CURATOR Victoria, CURATOR formerly known as the Council on the Ageing, and Sue is also Director of the International Federation of Ageing. So she's just come back from the UN discussing these sorts of issues. Sue, what are the best and worst things about getting older in Melbourne?
I'm just thinking about those 5 hours and what I'm going to do with them. How marvellous.
You get 5 hours every day as well.
I know, that's fantastic. I could use those. Look, I think most of my day is spent looking at the issues that we're facing and the problems that people are bringing to us. So I'll focus a bit on that. But I think it is a success story, and I think on the whole most of us are enjoying living longer and look forward to continuing to live longer.
Beats the alternative.
I haven't tried it for a while, or lately. But I think, and certainly I congratulate Melbourne on working towards an age-friendly Melbourne. That's something that CURATOR is very involved in and have been advocating internationally and nationally and in Victoria. So one of the things that today has been a day where we've reconfirmed that Melbourne is the most livable city in the world. But is it for older people? And I guess that's the question we continue to ask, and that's what the age-friendly notion that the World Health is working on with local governments around the world. So the question then is, is it a good place to live? What's the good things about getting older? Well, I think there is something about getting over teenage years and the problems of being a teenager and the issues that you grapple with, and getting past having kids and those sorts of things and getting to an age where you go, who cares? I can just get on and be me and who I want to be. So I think there is something about getting older that is heartwarming in terms of trying to pursue who you are. And I think the diversity of Melbourne allows us to do that more than many places in the world. And if you live in Sierra Leone, 32 is old. That's the average life expectancy. So, there are great things about living in Melbourne. But there are some pitfalls to living and getting older in Melbourne. And I think one of those is around age discrimination and the way that we perceive ageing in our community, that we don't celebrate the participation of us as we grow older as much as we should. And that's, I think, again, what the age-friendly work talks to, particularly around issues of respect and the way in which we were talking earlier about invisibility. And I know older women talk about this a lot. You go into a shop and suddenly everyone behind you is being served and you aren't, and you go, what happened to me? That song, what about me? So I think there are some big issues that we need to address around age discrimination. In places I go, I think at times I could tell an ageist joke and I'd get a lot of laughter and no one would stand up and go, oi, you can't say that. We can't get away with racist jokes or sexist jokes, but ageism, look at birthday cards, they're shocking. And that's, I think, the public face, in a sense, of those issues. So I think, for me, age discrimination is the worst about getting old in Australia. Okay, thank you very much, Sue. Brian Howe, AO, is Professorial Associate at the Centre for Public Policy at Melbourne University, and of course he was a Cabinet Minister from 1984 to 1996.
serving in many portfolios: defence, social security, health, housing and community services, and of course as Deputy Prime Minister. And Brian was recently a member of the government's advisory panel on the economic potential of senior Australians, and produced a report last year called Turning Grey into Gold. Brian Howe, what are the best and worst things about getting old in Melbourne, or Melbourne getting older?
Well, I was going to ask the question really, which Melbourne? I mean, Melbourne in the latter part of the 19th century was marvellous Melbourne. Time of extraordinary growth and great wealth. Gold really came to Melbourne by the 1880s, and Melbourne was, by the end of the 19th century, one of the largest cities in the world. It was a very, very important city. Melbourne, in the post-war period, in the 1950s, 60s and 70s, went through another period of extraordinary change. And you can talk about that in various ways: industrialisation that we'd never known before, I think, huge increase in population, a complex society that Sue referred to, a city really created by the motor car. You know, car wars, Graham Davison wrote about. And this extraordinary growth of Melbourne as grew out, you know, it became really the garden suburbs par excellence. Everyone wanted the quarter-acre block. They moved out further, but they wanted trees and open space and young families, and everyone seemed young. It was a young city. And now we're really in a third phase, and another period of extraordinary change. I think Melbourne's a city in transition. And we're not quite sure what it's transitioning to, in a sense. Melbourne is not going to be so car-based as it was in the past. Melbourne is extended, you know, it must be 4 times the size what it would have been in the immediate post-war period. Just gone extraordinary. In terms of the coverage of land, it's one of the largest cities in the world. In terms of population, of course, it's still a modest city. But you can ask that question in a different way too. You can say, well, when you talk about Melbourne, we just heard about, you know, Melbourne, what is it, the most exciting or the best city? Or
most livable.
The most livable city in the world, oh yeah. Well, I think, when I was asked about myself, well, I live in Carlton. I mean, everything's there. You know, I can literally walk. I can walk to my library. I can walk to my cafe. I can get the tram into the city. I'm very close to hospitals. I work at the university. Life is just fantastic. You know, I've never lived in a place which gives me so many choices and so much access. And, this is the most wonderful city. But I think if you looked at Melbourne inside out, you know, lost in space out there in the suburbs, you don't have all the services that a wealthy city like the city of Melbourne is able to provide. And I think that really worries me. I think if I were living, you know, out past Waverley, which is now the geographical centre, I think, of southeastern Melbourne, you know, out in Cranbourne and all, you know, then further out, you know, the further you go, I would say the poorer the quality of the services being provided. Now, there's a myth, and the myth is that older people tend to live in the inner city, in a place like Melbourne, or the city of Melbourne. Of course, that's not true. Melbourne is one of the youngest municipalities in Australia, full of younger people who are really choosing to live in this more dense environment. So, in a sense, that's an important thing. But for older people, very often they're the people who are living out on the fringe. You know, that choice that you made in midlife, you said, well, we could do better than this. We could sell our place, we'd get a great price for it, and we'd be able to move out and we'd be in that lovely tree line, you know, out there in the Dandenongs or somewhere. Well, you know, I'd say moving out possibly was a bit of a mistake for some people, because it basically will mean, for example, you're car dependent and the price of energy is going to go up and the public transport's not available. We're just making a very big decision. Government's made it. It says we're going to build a tunnel and that's going to add, going to cost us 6 or 7 billion for that increased road traffic, whereas Rod Eddington in this very place only a few weeks ago, the author of the report on transport said, when he was asked very directly, would you go ahead with the tunnel now? He said, no, I'd give the rail transport the higher priority. So the question, Melbourne is many Melbournes. It's a very big city today, and I don't think we can just talk about Melbourne as if everywhere is the same. I think there are many different parts of Melbourne which present quite different challenges and opportunities for older people.
Thank you, Brian. Marion Lau is OAM, is director of her own management consultancy, and Marion has had a long engagement with and focus on aged care, on providing appropriate care for people from culturally diverse, ethnically diverse, linguistically diverse backgrounds. And Marion also has had a focus on migrant women's health and well-being, as well as small business consulting and mentoring. Marion, what do you see as the best and worst things about getting older in Melbourne?
I'm looking at it from a different perspective, and I do agree with my two colleagues here on the proviso that you are English-speaking, you understand the system, and you know where everything else is. If you are a person who is from a non-English-speaking background, you are a widow, and while we have our lifespan and extended, we still also have the opportunity or the event that women live longer than men, despite the fact that we are all living longer. So we have women who, again, migrant women who in the past have not been used to looking after themselves, not been used to going around and conducting businesses. So I don't think we are friendly here in Melbourne for people who do not speak English, for people who do not understand the system. And given that now the Commonwealth Government has changed the system to encourage people to stay at home longer and not going into aged care facilities, and again, there's another story, the lack of suitably built and properly equipped aged care facilities. Anyway, so the government now at the moment is encouraging people to stay at home now. What about those people who have a number of years ago, Melbourne being such a friendly city, and Melbourne encouraging a lot of people to move back into inner city? We have a lot of multi-story apartments where we used to have couples who have moved in to live there, and I do know a number of migrant couples have moved in on their retirement into inner city Melbourne. Now the husband is gone and the woman is still by themselves. They are living there on their own. They do not know the system. They were relying on their husbands to care for them, to provide support and to help them access services and facilities. We're not getting that. The other area that I find most worrying from an age perspective is that while I commend the local government for the improvement to the transport system and the tramways and improving, how shall I say, having a special area for trams and special area for cyclists, we haven't taught our cyclists to be careful of passengers coming off their trams. Even myself, I'm younger than a lot of older persons, and I can always get knocked down if I don't look after myself. You get off the tram, and regardless of the bells from the tram drivers, the bicycles just whizzes past you. And in the evening, so who's going to come out in the evening? So that's one disadvantage that we have in the city with the improvement that's been made, that's been counteracted by the lack of understanding of where the pedestrians are. And again, we made reference to the fact that older drivers are now no longer driving so much. So they rely on public transport. So what do we do if we are not safe from that? So that's the issue. Another issue that worries me is that there are a lot of older women who, now that they are widows, would like to perhaps come back and return to the workforce. You will find it very hard to get an employer who would be prepared to take someone who is a little bit more mature than the average graduate from university to give them a job. Now, where would you find what would you do with all the experience that are all packaged up with all these people who have spent their lifetime working and now gaining all this wonderful experience. What do you do with that package of knowledge and information? We have students coming out from university 2 days after university. They're taking on the jobs. They don't know what's going on because they don't have life experience. Let me go back to transport. It's wonderful to have a ticketing system. It's wonderful that we have a system called MyKey. But have we thought about the people who do not live here in Melbourne? Have we thought about people who are from the country? Have we explained to them that when they come to Melbourne and they want to go on public transport, they have to get this thing called MyKey? And where do they get MyKey? And did we tell them that they have to pay for it and they have to top it up? Because if they don't top it up, the machine squeaks at them. So that's not very friendly. I came in on a tram this afternoon, and a very older gentleman was trying to get on a tram. There were a dozen younger people on there, and I was sitting on one of the front seats. And this poor gentleman was trying to get up. Everybody stared at him. Nobody went to help him. So I threw my bag and I went and helped him. And the poor gentleman was so embarrassed. He said, "I don't need you to stand up for me." He said, "I'm quite all right." But he could barely walk straight. So this is the sort of thing that I find is not very friendly. So I'm not sure. I'm going to go all over the place,
well,
Peter.
I think there's a bunch of issues there, and one of them is respect, which I think Sue mentioned right at the start, and we might come back to talk about that. Well, I'll invite our next speaker, Collette Browning. Professor Collette Browning is the head of Primary Care Research, the Primary Care Research Unit at Monash University. She's recognised nationally and internationally as a leader in writing and thinking about psychology and health, and her research focuses on healthy ageing and improving quality of life for older people, amongst other things like self-managing chronic disease and consumer involvement in healthcare. Collette.
Thank you. Yes, well, I'm really interested in what everyone said. I'm going to come at it from a little different perspective, from a research perspective, because that's part of my job is to conduct research about ageing and with ageing older people to try and understand what's important for them. But also, I'm one of those baby boomers, so I'm fairly keen that as I move further and further into old age, that we start to get a few things right in terms of ageing. So this is very much self-interest. So, although when I started, I was much younger when I started working in this field, but over the last few years, it started to hit home for me, which is an interesting experience as a researcher. So one of the things I wanted to touch on is this whole issue of what do we mean by healthy ageing. And we've conducted a number of studies where we try and ask older people, well, what does that mean? What does healthy ageing mean for you? And often it is centred around your physical health, but also it's very much about the social lives that people lead, their family lives, the sorts of things Sue has been talking about, having respect. All those things are important. And what we've found in our studies, particularly a study that we've been now conducting for 18 years, where we've actually followed people over a long period, 18 years in Melbourne, what we've found is that the things that are very highly predictive of ageing well and continuing to age well are things like physical activity, good nutrition, good social networks, and by that I mean not necessarily having lots of friends or lots of social networks, but social networks that you want, people around that you want to engage with. And we often think of those things as individual behaviours. You know, well, get out there and be physically active, make sure you eat well, you know, find some friends. But in fact, society really controls all of those things. And I think we need to start thinking about is how a city like Melbourne actually influences those sorts of things which are key to healthy ageing. So things like the built environment. If we look around this part of Melbourne, it's fairly walkable. We can walk around and get on trams, but there are other parts of Melbourne where people live in high-rise apartments. It's very difficult to get out. They might be sort of locked between roads. They can't easily access a park. And they're the sorts of things that planners in Melbourne have to really think about. If we're saying that being physically active is important for healthy ageing, then how can we create a city that's going to encourage that sort of activity? Similarly, the whole issue of neighbourhoods. Interestingly, as a suburb, Essendon is a really interesting community. There's a lot of strip shopping, there's a lot of green spaces, and I've only lived there for about 15 years, but the shops I go to, I know everyone knows me, and it's a very empowering part of living in these sorts of communities. But not all suburbs are like that. Often people that we talk to say they feel really cut off from their local neighbourhoods. So again, I think when we're thinking about Melbourne, I worry that we've lost a lot of those neighbourhoods in Melbourne. And one of my students, in fact, has done a study in this area, and it got an interesting title. It's called The Role of the Shop in Older People's Lives. And often we think about social networks as our friends, our family, those sorts of things. But in this study, what she was able to show that the ability for an older person to walk to the local shopping centre easily, go to the local butcher, whatever, everyone knows them, that was such a strong part of their lives and contributed significantly to their well-being. So what worries me about Melbourne is that we're losing some of those sorts of communities in Melbourne. And for older people, I think this is going to have a big impact, particularly as we're also saying that we're so reliant on cars. If we have to drive, 5-10 kilometres to get to High Point or Doncaster Village or whatever it happens to be to do our shopping, that means that for older people who aren't driving, that's going to be a difficulty. So I want us to think, I don't want to be negative about Melbourne because I'm a real Melbourne person and I love Melbourne. So every time I go away, I love travelling, I just love coming home to Melbourne. So I see lots of positives about living in Melbourne and I couldn't imagine living anywhere else. But I'm worried about the changes that I'm seeing, particularly around the neighbourhoods, which I think aren't going to encourage healthy ageing in the long term.
Thank you very much, Collette Browning. Finally, Father Bob Maguire, AM, well known for his work as a Catholic priest, community activist, community worker and media star. He works tirelessly to feed the hungry and house the homeless via the Father Bob Maguire Foundation. Father Bob.
Yes, thank you, but I mean, I don't want to talk because I don't know as much as these people. No, I don't. I'm an imposter for this. But I'm just thinking, well, thank God you were first because I can think, and what am I going to do? And everybody you say, I said, well, we learned something in school in the old days. Everybody needs a guardian angel to help them to serve God, I think. Was that in grade 5 or something? But I'm just thinking while you're talking, everybody needs a guardian angel to help them to grow old. I mean, I'm not with wings and things. I mean, another being, another person, you know what I mean? Because I don't think, I mean, are we born old or is age thrust upon us? Because it's a phenomenon. Slavko is driving me in here because they don't trust me. And said, well, hang on, I mean, what is old? And I'm trying to say to myself, well, I can't define what old is. What is old? Because if people call you old, I know that there's a danger that you'll end up acting old if you're treated as old. You know what I mean? So I don't understand that because I presume whatever we are, the person we are is the same from the womb to the tomb, and maybe even, and God knows we don't want to introduce religion, is beyond, who knows, isn't it? And that's what interests me, is it's an adventure more than anything else, and it should be made adventurous, and it should be made, dare I use the word, fun. You know what I mean? Because I find, I came in tonight and said, because a bit grim. See, I find a lot of congregations, for God's sake, a lot of, what are the gatherings, isn't it? these days are grim. So somebody wrote in the paper last week, I think a book was launched on Monday and I can't remember the name of it, but he was talking about the proliferation of enragement. We're all angry. Thank God the Essendon thing came along because we didn't have to worry more about Syria. We're angry. Then we're angry about the cricket. We can't get on without being angry, apparently. We're addicted to it. You know what I mean? And at the same time, he said we should replace enragement with engagement. See, which gets to the neighbourhood thing and all of that. I mean, I'm a firm. I've always believed in the what's the word? The ability of a neighbourhood to nurture. I mean, we've got our own DNA that comes with us, you know. And I mean, if you're unfortunately born like me, Scottish, which means that when you wake up in the morning, you don't say "Good morning, God," you say "Good God morning." You know, so you're starting behind the scratch from the time you even open your eyeballs, you know what I mean? But if you get over that, then you've got your environment. You know, and it's not only the outside, but you're in your bedroom, whatever it is. Like the autistic child was reported by his brother as saying, "Mum, what Jimmy's in there and he's saying that Jesus lives under the bed." And she said, "Well, he's probably right." Isn't it? I mean, you've got to make something out of where you are. If it's a flat in Port Melbourne, South Melbourne, aged care or whatever it is, it doesn't matter whether you're in a cell. As that man who wrote to fame, what is a man's search for meaning? Who's that? Viktor Frankl wrote, didn't he? He said, well, he's in a concentration camp, Auschwitz or something. It's up to you to find a place that nurtures you. Where are you going to look for a place in Auschwitz that's going to nurture? But so many Jewish people didn't they? And he found the place that had the shelter, the shed, the roof, isn't it, over the place where they used to put the bodies. Somebody died in the hut at night, they'd take the body, put it under there. And he found the best place for him was, in fact, to sit on, because nobody else went there. And so you had a place for yourself, isn't it? So I've always, the neighbourhood, that's why I'm hanging around South Melbourne, Port Melbourne. I mean, not because I want to get up the Archbishop's nose, but I simply try to tell... Well, I try to tell the poor man there's more to Roman Catholicism than cathedrals, and there's things called neighbourhoods. And we're in the middle of something, if you don't mind. We're trying to fall in love with the neighbourhood, and the neighbourhood is falling in love with us. So please don't interrupt that relationship, you see, because it's taken 150 years to build. See, I like history and place, geography and history, and I think you have to do an audit wherever you are. Where'd this place come from? So we pay respects to our, don't we, to the Wurundjeri. Is a Wurundjeri here? And to the elders. But at the same time, we have to pay respects to the original settlers, isn't it? Who landed at, didn't they, Sandridge or Station P, down my way, and then came up the track, didn't they, which is now City Road, and they crossed the river, didn't they, at a ford, and they came into marvellous Melbourne. And then when that got too big for them, they crossed back over the river, didn't they, and built Emerald Hill. Before that was Tent City. And then came Essendon. And then, well, we won't go there. And then it would be a glorious South Melbourne that was always the bridesmaid, never the bride. So she liked to be as magnificent and marvellous as Melbourne. But what I'm saying is this: the neighbourhood is the guardian angel that will help each of us to grow old gracefully. But I noticed the word gracefully, but the other word I would have had would grow old humorously, because I think there's so much wealth in the. I'm not getting as much time as they did. Anyway, we've got more, haven't we? We've got more to go, haven't we?
We have. We've got plenty of time.
And we've got a chance to have a funny way of being serious.
I wanted to, you're helping us grow old humorously, which is great. But I wanted to pick up on the very first point you made, Father Bob, and throw it back to the rest of the panel, which is, what do we mean by old? So what do we mean by old?
My parents used to say that you are as old as you feel. And if you ask me this minute how old I am, I can say I don't think I'm anything over 25. But then tomorrow morning when you ask me, I could say I think I'm 101. So, but having said all that, the other thing that I think that we are, and I'm also, how shall I say, comparing this with, again, my upbringing, we are like wine and cheese. We mature with age. So as we mature, we need to be respected. And if people look at older persons the same way that they look at a bottle of wine that they pay $200,000 for, look at it and you know, rub the bottle every day and clean it and polish it, but not drink it, they should be looking at us like that.
Brian Howe.
Much longer for the ageing, you know. The wine's taking a long time to mature these days. Look, I think it is important to, you know, to recognise how much things have changed. I mean, this is a huge change, and I think communities.
Brian, just pull the mic a bit closer.
Sorry, communities don't like change very much. I mean, Bob's talking about Albert Park. You know, I don't think Southport or anything like what they might have been 30 or 40 years ago. I lived in Fitzroy for 30 years, and yeah, Fitzroy was a very different place when I first moved there in 1968 than it was when I left there 5 years ago. Massive change in the composition of the population. It was full of Italians and Greeks and ethnically incredibly diverse. Today it's much more what you'd say is gentrified. But if you think about ageing, to come back to this question of what is old age, or what is age? Ageing is a process. I mean, we age from the moment of birth. And, of course, one of the cultural problems we've got now is, in a sense, the things we grew up with, the attitudes we had about, you know, how you retired at, you know, you got old in your 60s and you got to think about retirement, and then you worked out, you know, what you were going to do when you retired. You're going to go, you know, go off home, maybe to Crete, or you're going to take a caravan, go all around Australia. But now, when you're in your 60s, you've got maybe another 20 or 30 years. And what's more, you've got this extended middle age where you're fit and well and where you could do all sorts of things if you really wanted to. And in a way, it's in your interest to do that, to be active, to think of what you might do. You could really have, at 60, another career. A lot of people do have another career. They go off and, you know, do a course, or they do. You know, I remember my father-in-law, he did what he'd always wanted to do. He wanted to be a cabinet maker, and he got just sick of the SEC, looking after cars, and he retired at the earliest opportunity at 60, and he went home and he just made these beautiful tables, and he had a whole new career. It wasn't a paid career, and you could never persuade him to sell anything. So, you know, I think we've got to think, well, the world isn't the same. It does change, and we have to deal with change. But change has got to take the more positive note. Change has got marvellous opportunities in it for us if we recognise that. And that's where the point about ageism comes in, doesn't it? Because the attitudes are there that people that are a certain chronological age, we can't expect them to be doing well in employment, or, you know, doing a paid job, or even doing a volunteer job that's got a label attached to it and got some real status.
And I think, can I jump in? I think the issues that we're starting to toss around, and it'd be great to have other people join in, but, you know, what is old is probably the nub of the issue, in a sense, and that's how it does connect to discrimination. We've kind of set this thing as old as something, you know, them out there, and we've linked it somehow, the chronological age we've linked to capacity. and so that if you're old, you're incapable. Whereas that needs to be disaggregated. And, you know, the older driver issue, I've been on the TV 3 times, on the project 3 times, same topic, older drivers. And we have this thing about driving an old. You know, if we were serious about road deaths, we wouldn't give an 18 to 25-year-old male a licence. I mean, you know, if we want to do something about death rates. So we've kind of linked somehow this thing of old and capacity and age. So that's one thing, I think. The other thing, I think, is in actual fact we are the younger self, but more like a babushka doll, where the younger person are all the other layers. And those layers are also important, but often not recognised. And so how we actually not discount the ageing, you know, and this issue of retirement, we've got to get rid of that notion. You know, Bismarck rewarded his soldiers with retirement at age 65. They lived to 45. You know,
weren't many of them who got to enjoy
no,
their awards.
and when it happened, you know, like when they did, they, you know, I mean, past Bismarck, moving on, people on average retired at 65 and lived, there was 3% lived long enough to retire, and they lived 6 months. So, you know, we're in a completely different world now, and we haven't adjusted our psyche and our thinking and our conversations and the media, and, you know, there's a whole revolution. In a sense, we need older people to be revolting, i.e. we need to get angry in a different way and say, you know, no more. I want a different world for me and those following me, and also those who are still alive above me, to have a different perspective of ageing, and that we should be celebrating this longevity that we're experiencing. Yeah, you know, the trials and tribulations that go with it, but are they actually, you know, if we built our environments in a way that enabled us to do the best we can with what we've got and access those bits and pieces we need along the way at different times or permanently, and constructed the world in a way that was more welcoming, then it could look quite different, I suspect. I'm hoping so.
I think with, you know, those sort of...
Just pull that microphone touch close here.
Those ideas about age I think are really interesting, because I think we do have an assumption that chronological age and getting older equates with disability or poor functioning or whatever it happens to be. But in fact, from a sort of lifespan point of view, old age is the most variable, if you like, because you can have, and we all know this from our own experiences, someone who's 98, say, who's living independently in their own home, having a good life, and we can have someone who's 60 who has, you know, late stages in dementia. So your age doesn't define how you're going to live your life. And I think given that now we have a change in the population and there are more people over the age of 65, if we take that as a marker, I think society eventually will actually get the message, because there will be just more of us around. So it will just have to happen. That the balance is changing, and I think it is in our hands to change how people view what an older person's life could be.
Yeah, but I was thinking to myself that I think evolution has caught up with us too, because in fact right now we've got the younger generation who, for the first generation in the history of the human race, which has everything ever learned by the human race at its fingertips. Now, I mean, that to me, that's the pivotal point. Not that we're getting older, but that they now know everything. And the problem, no, they do know everything, but they don't know what to do with it. Which means that I think it's time for the older people to come to the aid of the younger generation. You almost have to conscript old people and even insinuate that they're being selfish by growing old alone. Because every young person badly needs. I mean, I'm thinking of whoever it is that bashed that man, wherever it was. Picture was in the paper this morning. That young person obviously has had no experience of older people. I mean, you bash strangers, even if it's a member of your family. They become strange to you. The whole predicament is, in fact, we all have to reinvent community, whereas we've evolved into a society. And a society is only a heap of people. And we're doing it every day. I live down there and I look up and there's Nonda Katsalidis is Eureka, and I'm saying, oh God, poor buggers. Why? Because in fact they're probably rich and affluent, but in fact they're alone. You know, and even the film that's out now called, what is it called, Elysium, isn't it? Where they're all up there, aren't they? They're all up there living in a gated community, and Matt Damon is trying to get some medical assistance. And I mean, to me, this is a turning point in history where we badly need to ask, even to run up and down Victoria Avenue. I'd love to if I had my legs, but blow a trumpet and say, all of you people sitting down drinking coffee for the 9th time today, because that's all you have to do, would you mind coming and giving a hand washing the feet of the poor? And if you can't do that, because that's asking temperamentally, some people aren't suited to that, could you at least come and listen to somebody or do something? Because we need you now more than ever, the old people, the older people, because you've got a thing that the kids haven't got, and that's wisdom. See? You'd almost have to kill the thing as you were growing older to end up being old without wisdom. You'd have to do it to death because it's supposed to be your bonus.
I wanted to pick up Bob's point a bit more from the angle that we're talking about the people up there in the tower, and maybe they were escaping, were they, or were they
in the ship in Elysium? Elysium, yes, not in a Eureka. I'm not saying that, but this film that's got them in a.
I think part of this discussion is really about challenging some of the kind of myths about ourselves and our society. I think 80% of our housing, 80%, that's 8 out of every 10 houses, has been built really for a family. And a family meant, in the post-war period, a mother and father and 2 children. And they, in the post-war period, were married. And what's more, when they got married, they expected marriage to be forever. Now, we know that's not the world that's actually emerged. We have very high rates of marriage breakup and so on. We have not a picture of households like that. I mean, half of all households in Melbourne are 1 or 2 person households. Something like 20% of all households are 1 person households.
25%, Brian. Yeah, it's close to 25%.
25%.
Yeah, Australia-wide.
So this is a huge change. And for a lot of those 1 person households will be older women because women are going to tend to live longer. And while we put enormous emphasis on, caring for people at home and all of that, for those women living alone, perhaps in a rather larger house, a difficult house to care for and so on, they get called maybe once a day or something by Meals on Wheels or by some group coming to help them to do a particular thing. And that's the only social moment for the day. So one of the things we've got to think about in a way is how do we re-socialise a community which is increasingly individualistic and which people have chosen at different stages of their life to live separately and so on, to arrange their affairs in a much more individualistic way than we thought people were actually living. So, I think the world is changing and we have to respond to that change.
Just on the topic of housing, I've just written a piece about this for Inside Story, actually, and we did some analysis of the 2011 census. 62% of people aged over 70 who live alone live in a house with 3 bedrooms or larger. So there's all sorts of repercussions of that around how we're using our housing, but also it suggests there's a whole lot of disincentives to downsizing and perhaps a lack of alternatives. As Brian said, most houses we have are 3-bedroom houses and that sort of thing. Marion?
But just to elaborate on that angle, we've forgotten the families where the children have returned home to live because of the cost of everything else. So they have a single-person parent usually, again, as we've all confirmed, is usually a single older mother, and a couple of young, in their 20s, young persons coming home and living there, and they treat the home as a hotel. So how can we downsize? How can we go into a one-bedroom unit? Again, I then refer back to different cultures. In my culture, there's no way that we can throw our child out. And as long as they are not married, they are still your child, your baby. Your baby may be 40 or 35, and you may be 75 or 80. You don't throw them out. So what do we resolve that? And I need to stress on that we have a large population in Australia who are people who have migrated from other countries. They are from non-English speaking background. They do not, and if they are living in all these on their own in big homes, how are they going to access services? And that's why what I make reference to earlier on, that with the government's changing rules for aged care, what do we expect these poor single women to do, living in a big house on their own, given 2 hours of care twice a week, and in between they don't have any children. Their children, because they're so modernized, they're all so progressive, they've moved out of home. The ones who can, they go out of home. The one who can't, they can't even look after themselves, so how can they look after mother?
Very interesting that there is a growth of 3 generational households now. The statistics show up an increasing number of households where, in fact, you have 3 generations living together. So this is the opposite side of the one-person household coin. And I do know people who've sold their house and moved out of home because the kids wouldn't leave. So one way to get rid of them. Okay, your question. Thanks.
Pauline's my name. Just prior to coming into this meeting, I was standing on the footpath talking to my 94-year-old mother, who does live in Tasmania, and she was saying how she was feeling really depressed because she can't get out. Last week she had a visit by some nurses who were coming to assess her situation, and because she's very in touch, still has all the faculties and still does beautiful craft work, they were making all these other suggestions. But she said, Pauline, I can't get out. I can't call a taxi because they won't take me to the door. They won't help me into the taxi. The bus that the council offers is too full. I will have to make a booking and probably wait till someone passes away before they can fit me in. So in suggesting that we have activities in the neighbourhood, that's all very well because obviously they are around, but a lot of people stuck in high-rise on their own that can't get to those places. So there needs to be everything connected if we do offer those activities.
Okay, well, that raises the big issue about mobility, and while we statistically seen, because I don't want to make any assumptions about age and what happens as we get up, but statistically seen, we tend to drive less as we get older, or like my mother, she no longer drives at night, for example, doesn't like to drive at night, drives during the day, and people start giving up their licences and so on. So how do we deal with that, or how well are we going with that whole mobility issue?
I think this is one of the key issues in every study that we've done in talking to older people. Transport comes up number one every time, and it's how you live your life. If we live in a car society, so a lot of us have got used to that we're going to be able to hop in our car and go wherever we like. Once we're unable to do that, we need options that are going to allow us to live the lives that we want to lead. And I think this is a key issue, and it depressed me when I heard about the more money into roads, when really we need more money into public transport and accessible transport.
I was going to add in transport. I was saying earlier I've been working in the area of ageing for 35 years, and it's transport, and it doesn't seem to be taken seriously. And it's in all forms.
Is that because, our public transport system is designed around getting people to and from work? And so there's assumption that, you know, after 9:30 in the morning
Yes.
Until 4 o'clock, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter as much on Saturday and Sunday. It's discretional.
Well, transport is for workers to go to the city to go home again. That's what our transport system is really built for and around. There has been more work done, and there are community transport options, but it's not enough. And not what we've been trying to suggest is that you actually think about the cities. I'm not just talking about Melbourne City Council, I'm talking Melbourne, that you have your arteries, the big veins and arteries, with the main transport, train, tram stuff, and then you have the little buses in the capillaries filling in between, getting you to the main. So they do door to door. We had big problems when the taxi program was realigned for the one older person who was wealthy who might be ripping off the system, and the opening was closed significantly, that you had to have only very specific disabilities to actually get the maxi taxi, as it's often called, and the taxi subsidy, where in actual fact more people need that support, because most older people on a limited income can't spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars that then is matched by state government. You do limit yourself, and so it wasn't going to blow the budget. So I think those sorts of things where we have supportive processes that can enable people to continue doing the strip shopping. I mean, a cab's not going to pick you up and take you 200 metres to your local shop.
Or if they do, they're going to be in a pretty bad mood about it.
Yeah, very grumpy, yes. So it is one of those issues. Yeah. And I think we also need to think about the community and neighbourhood, how we can find a friend who can assist you of whatever age. And I wanted to pick up one of the things that Bob was saying about... Do you still call yourself Father Bob?
Yeah, no, Mother Bob, anything.
Yeah, okay. Sister Bob. Now, there's a good one.
Yeah.
Hey, sister. Yeah, it works.
Yeah.
The notion of our communities and neighbourhoods and trying to rebuild those, age segregation has taken over our community. How do you actually connect people when you've got preschool, kinder, school, it's all age segregated. We don't connect across our communities. So I think the way in which we do that and build communities is by common interests and sharing and developing relationships that then are intergenerational, multi-generational. Not necessarily families, because, families behave badly. We don't like each other all the time. But let's do it across generations, though.
But also there's often the case that you're in fact in a different city to your parents or whatever. And yet, I mean, I know I was talking to someone recently who runs a small not-for-profit organisation, does international work in Nepal, and she was saying she's constantly approached by people looking for meaning in their life who want to do something to be helpful. And it's not as if there aren't people around looking for things to do that might actually connect them, who are fit and able, who might feel more connected to the community. But let's take another question. Thank you.
We spent about an hour identifying the issues. We haven't discussed solving the issues. For example, the problem with the current breakdown of the family unit, which means that the continuation of care of us as we get older has gone, because the daughters like to have three partners, not husbands anymore, three partners and a whole gaggle of children. So the family unit has disappeared, and therefore the care of the aged as we get older is disappearing. We look after ourselves. The second issue, this business of age. I've got a form here that says, fill in this form, what is your age? Is that the chronological age or is that my biological age? When people say to me, what's your age, Joe? I say, I'm as old as you think I am. So we've been put into a parcel of age, and there is on the form that I've got to fill in this forum. Now we have to do...
We'll blame Jeff for that one.
I'm saying, what are our solutions to all these problems that you have arisen? What are your solutions?
Well, interesting. Sue, Hendy and I were at a conference that coded upon a national policy day in Canberra recently, and this very issue of age and forms came up, and the suggestion was just don't answer that question whenever you can.
I think that's actually... We can start revolting now. Unless you really have to never fill in your age. You can be proud of it. You can actually say, personally I can say, I'm 55 and whatever. But when you actually get to those forms, maybe we should revolt and not, I mean, obviously if you want to get the pension, you've got to put your age because they won't give it to you. You know, there are good reasons sometimes, but otherwise...
The second part of the question, in a way, is a more challenging one, and that is, as it was put, the breakdown of the family unit. Now, there are lots of reasons, I suppose, why we might see things that way. Women are much more likely to be in the workforce than they might have been previously. We're much more mobile. We're likely to have moved interstate, overseas. Our city's much bigger. We may live on the other side of the city. How do we deal, Father Bob, how do we deal with those?
I get back to that simple thing about everybody's got to accept responsibility for somebody else. Now, I mean, it verges on the religious, you know, and religion's not that kosher in Australia, you know, but so you've got to find a humanistic philosophy to do it. And I suppose the politicians, don't they, for each side tries to develop a philosophy of why entrust us with the governance of the Commonwealth. We'll look after you, and then you find during the political campaign that in fact they're going to look after, they promise to look after special interest groups or lobby groups, some special. We look after you and you. And I'm saying, well, who's going to look after the Commonwealth? You see, the 99%, you see, are not going to be cared for. And can't be, because we're not supposed to govern from the top down. We're supposed to govern from the bottom up, isn't it? Trickle up. Now that gets back to the street, it gets back to the neighbour, it gets back to what kind of a neighbourhood have we got. You know, with the Chinese, the culture, I was watching television, the Chinese government channel, and it stated, we've got a very new problem here, said the commentator, because we've now got older people living in villages in several provinces, and we are now going to have to make a law that the younger people, members of the family, are bound to visit at least twice a year, yeah, to make it law, because it's at the core of the Chinese culture that we're in this together. And in fact, if that bond is broken, the whole Commonwealth is going to suffer. The Commonwealth itself will tear apart. And that's where I had hoped, being a church person, that the churches, for God's sake, would be little pit stops, not comfort stations, little pit stops, where people would be able to find one another, decide to help a stranger, you know, all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, Australia's in a fascinating position as far as I'm concerned. We can think global, but we've got to act local, isn't it? Now, we've got to become, you know, I mean, it's down and dirty and it's boring and all the rest of it, but I'm terribly sorry. There's no app.
I can't get it on my mobile phone.
There's an app for everything, you know, but why can't I get it on the app, you know, to help my mother? Right. You see, sorry, mate, you'll have to go and knock on the door. And when you knock on the door and your mother's been on Twitter and texting and that all her life, you knock on the door in the flesh, she'll open the door and say, what are you doing here? Why didn't you text me? Isn't it? It's sad. The Word was made flesh and dwelt amongst us.
Okay, we have a couple more questions, but I just want to see if anyone else wants to respond on the panel to this.
Yes.
Yeah, Marion.
I'd just like to perhaps put a more positive up in a little bit negative right through the evening. So let me put a bit of positivity into what I'm going to say in a minute. And that is referring back to, we had the negativity of having the 3 generations in the one household. But perhaps can I suggest that let's go back to, and Father Bob's comments encouraged me to make this comment, and that is the extended family, the positive side of the extended family, where nobody leaves the house and every generation looks after the generation after. And I think we've done that for hundreds of years, and I don't think we've done badly by it. I think where China failed was when it decided to be globally friendly like everybody else and have the one-child family, and that is where it's bringing it down now, and they are suffering the consequences. So I would like to suggest that perhaps if we go back to this extended family situation where, as I say, everybody lives there and look after each other, and that the government would not have to worry about what to do with the older person and who are going to care for them, who's going to care, and the gentleman there,
but
you will have your carer in the house.
The question is, I mean, as Father Bob said, in China, they bring in a rule to say you have to visit
That's
your parents.
right.
I mean, this is not the sort of thing you can legislate. Really,
I'm not suggesting that. I'm just suggesting that we go back to the extended family.
Okay, Brian.
This discussion with Goh Chok Tong, who was the time was the Prime Minister of Singapore, and he said pretty much what Marion's just been saying. But the reality is that in China or in Vietnam or in Australia or whatever, people are going to live in very different ways than they did in the past. We've just passed in the Federal Parliament the National Disability Insurance Scheme. Now, that scheme is going to cost billions of dollars. And what's that about? It's about transferring the responsibility for caring with the severely disabled from families to a much more collective responsibility, a social responsibility. Because when you think of women caring for disabled children, I remember in the town hall here, when I was at the Tipping Society, their annual meeting we're talking about, and some women came up to me and they just said, my life is over. I have no choice but to care for this dependent person for the rest of my life. There's no way I can have a life.
And then to worry about what happens when you die and who's going to care for them
next.
next.
To worry about that. So we have to come up with different ways, and I'm afraid that probably does mean that we have to pay more taxes and we have to provide a service that's not based on the family doing as much as the family has done by way of caring. And I think the same is true of the old, if you like. In a sense, we'll have to think about that in a much more creative way. Now, it's not just a matter of waiting until people become highly dependent as lonely people and so on. We need to think of much more imaginatively about the way we build communities physically, the way we build housing, so that we do develop more collective ways of people living together. It's not just all about transport, it's also we need to use our railway stations as opportunities to build a community around that station. Not partly to get the rail line used more, but also because that's an opportunity, in a sense, to build a different kind of community. And people might be interested at Murdoch University. They've got a Sustainable Cities program, and they describe what they call as urban villages, which is a model being developed in Western Australia to create the possibility, not just of old people living in a different, more collective, more communal environment, but a whole range of people and activities together, so you get alternative housing solutions as well as much greater use of public transport.
I just wanted to tell you a little bit about my story because of the relevance for what we've just been speaking about here. My husband died 4 years ago. Before that, he was very ill. He didn't want to help himself. He sat there waiting for somebody else to keep helping him. When he died, I looked at myself and I said, I'm not going down that track. So some of the things that I have done that I consider relevant is going out and helping myself. I started off with going to Seniors Week, took home a whole lot of pamphlets, and I now belong to 3 different organisations and can't fit everything into my week. The second thing is my house. Yes, I had a 4-bedroom, 2 living room and whatever house. I closed off half of it because I knew I couldn't keep it up myself. But in doing so, I suddenly thought, well, hold on, why do I have to have empty rooms sitting there? I can give somebody a home. And with very little in the way of modification, I did give somebody a home. And the rent helps with my income. These are the ways you can... as far as my family, both my sons live overseas. They don't come back here terribly often. They keep saying that I'm just one person and I should come to Chicago and things like that. And that's fine. My daughter does live here. Every few days she rings me up and her first words are you still upright? And it's a little in-house joke between the two of us. But as well as that, I have grandchildren here in Melbourne, and I regularly babysit at least 2-3 times a week. Not babysit anymore, it's boys sit, because they're quite big now. And I had to go, as a sidebar to that, I had to go back to football because each one of my 5 grandsons barracks for a different team. And as birthday presents, we started going to the football. It couldn't be Essendon and Collingwood because one of them would be happy and one wouldn't. So I've got to go to the football 5 times a year. And I had given away football when it became a corporate identity. But what I'm saying is between the Scrabble groups and between the going out for dinner and between everything, you have to help yourself. Even things like fighting with Telstra, I thought, well, I do, because Telstra, and I'm not just picking on Telstra. Origin's
you could say the same thing about Optus, yeah. But look,
Origin's just the same. But the big thing is they don't consider older people to be sane.
So, well, I think you've given us a great role model there of how it's possible. But as you say, there are challenges on the way because a whole lot of organisations, systems don't think about older people.
I just want to say, Anne-Marie, I live in inner city Melbourne and I really enjoy the Melbourne Conversations and the fact that we have the opportunity to actually come here and discuss issues that are significant to us. I live right in the city. If anyone's got a 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom house, sell it. Come and move in, get an apartment. There is so much that's offering. I mean, Melbourne City Council are fantastic. Have a read of one of their booklets, which I did in bed this afternoon. There is so much going on. There is so much support. My sister and I go to the Living Longer, Living Stronger at the Melbourne City bars 3 times a week. It costs us $5. I mean, there is so much available for free in the inner city. I'm retired. I don't have a huge income. But, I mean, there are the galleries, there's the Wheeler Centre, there's the libraries. I just think there's so much that's positive that's offered here in Melbourne. This is inner Melbourne. Obviously, there are factors in regard to the suburbs that obviously need addressing. But as for transport, we walk. Inner city is fantastic, and it's free if we want to go visit our children at the weekends. Okay. So I'm all for inner city Melbourne. All
right, you've just raised house prices in Melbourne, or real estate prices in Melbourne, so very good. We'll take another...
Anyway, I just want to go back to respect. I think all the baby boomers here, when we were at school, we always had to stand up and give our seat on the tram to an older person. And I really believe that this should be brought back into the schools again of teaching respect for older people, just like all the Indigenous groups everywhere. It's just normal to look after the elders. I also, too, I don't own a house. Shit happened along the way, and I'm one of those that lives in the private rental market, and being an elder person, try and rent a house from those pretty young things at the estate agents. Give that one a go. But also what's not come up is I want the right to die. If I've got Alzheimer's and wearing dependables and wetting in the bed and don't know who my family are and I'm a nuisance to everyone, give me a little purple pill, will you? Thank you.
All right, thank you. So I'll invite the panel to respond, first of all, to the specific issue there of older renters, because as I understand it, there's a very strong correlation between being in rental accommodation when you're older and being in poverty when you're older. So, Brian or Sue?
I think that's right. I think this is one of the kind of hidden problems that's not really been addressed by public policy. I think tens of thousands of people renting are paying 30, 40, 50, 60% of their income on rent. And obviously, as house prices, we have the highest house prices, I think, in the world, extremely expensive housing, and of course that's reflected in rent, and people, of course, in paying rent don't feel that they're kind of trapped in that situation. Now, it's especially important in Australia because we have such a tiny proportion of public housing, 5% of the housing stock in the public in the form of public housing, and of course the level of subsidy for people in the public sector is twice the level that it's available for people in the private sector, even if they're on very low incomes. So there's a need to really address that issue much more strongly, but it's part of a broader housing issue, and that was really raised when a person from the city was saying she'd made that shift into inner city living. I think we need to provide much more in the way of choices for older people to think, not just for older people, but generally. You know, we think these days in terms of work. People will maybe have 5 or 6 or 7 different jobs across their working life. Well, similarly, people's housing circumstances change, but in a sense there are great disincentives for people to sell their house. For example, the land tax, the
stamp duty,
state duty, capital gains tax, and so on. You know, that there are a lot of. We need to get changes in public policy to provide positive incentives for people to be able to make choices about where they would like to live. For example, Peter mentioned families are more dispersed. As people get older, they may want to live close to their family, but it's very hard to do when we have this very inflexible housing market which is not offering a lot of choice, and where I think governments need to get rid of stamp duty. They need to get rid of anything that's providing a disincentive for people to change. It means we're using our housing stock much less efficiently than we should be, basically because the incentives really work in the wrong direction. It's a good thing that people rent, but it's a bad thing that people are forced very often to pay such a high proportion of their income renting, especially in the private market. Big issues that need to be dealt with.
80% of people aged over 65 in Australia own their own home. That means 20% don't. That's still an awful lot of people renting. And so if you're renting, you have... I mean, and we talked about people wanting to stay in their own community, but if you lose, you know, if you know, the owner of your house that you're renting decides, well, no, they want to move there or they want to sell it or whatever, and you move out, it's going to be very hard to stay in the same area, isn't it? You have very few rights as a renter. And
we are seeing more older women on the streets or in their car. The issue of homelessness for older people is a significant issue. And so, you know, more social housing, more opportunities, more flexible models, particularly even things like having ways of contracting, but, you know, like a couple of people buying something together.
Well, we heard the great example here of the lady who divided her house.
So thinking about different ways. But one of the issues I wanted to pick up was the exercise one. Someone mentioned living long, living stronger. Yes, we created that 12 years ago. The notion of being strong physically as we age is something we need to get into our heads, that we need to think about exercise, doing weights, having strong legs, so that getting up and down out of chairs, getting off toilets, you know, basic, rudimentary things, but essential for staying independent. Walking, you know, you've got to have good physical capacity to walk everywhere, but it's good for your health and it invests in a whole range of ways. So I think, you know, that's one that I would applaud and you know, if nothing else, do that.
Marion.
I think also having the opportunity of some form of activities like part-time employment and obviously volunteering is very good. I'm just looking back at the example, a personal example. My father turned 96 2 months ago. He still works full-time, 6.5 days a week. And he is... He's full of his faculties. I spent a fortnight with him recently, and he spent all that time listening to all the CNN news, all the BBC news, listening to the Queen having her great-grandchild, and listening to all the politics that's around the world. And he can discuss much better than I can, all the politics around the world. Then that keeps him very much alert, and he has a reason to get up, and he knows when he's tired. So I think one of the things that we need to do is keep, and the Living Longer, Living Better program is one of the main things to do that, but also encouraging and persuading our business owners, our young retailers and all that they should benefit from having an older employee who has got a wealth of knowledge, who can mentor them, who have got, we are not expensive to employ, but we are very good with a lot of resources, with a lot of life experiences and knowledge that we can share with them, and teaching them the tricks of businesses, not just a 5-minute job, 5-minute course, and then coming out and become the Director General of a business. We just need to work from ground up.
Collette, I think you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I talked about the whole physical activity thing at the start, and in our studies, that's one of the main predictors of what we call ageing well. And I think if we're getting back to the Melbourne scenario, I think that's what we need to maintain in Melbourne and in our suburbs is neighbourhoods where people can actually walk as part of their life. Because I think for some people thinking of going to the gym or whatever, and I agree we need to do that as well, but just that incidental activity of being able to go out your front door, be in a safe environment, to walk to the local shop or walk down to the park, that has a big impact on your mobility and your function, and contributes significantly to how you're going to age. So
and people are much more likely to walk if they're not surrounded by heaps of traffic, for example. Exactly. I mean, there's a lot of evidence that the environment makes a big difference as to whether people or how much people will walk or not.
Yes. Yeah.
I think, let's think of ourselves, older people, as being a natural resource. That's what I'm thinking. Whatever, mining coal or mining whatever. I mean, but you got to put in the hard yakka of actually mining this old age. Because I remember visiting a place, an aged care place, and I was sitting down talking and listening, because I think we've got to listen. Because everybody's walking, and that's what annoys me about older people. Not that they annoy me, but it annoys me that there's no expectation that they've got something to say, whereas they are the storytellers of an Aussie culture, as we know, born in chains, hasn't had the opportunity yet to express that 150 years of settler wisdom. And with everybody here, for example, the breadth of wisdom in here is incredible. I can see it. But we're not going to hear from it tonight. But I was talking to this, she was 95 or something, and I said, well, she said World War II, London, hence the Blitz, hence you must have spent, yes, we spent a lot of time underground. After a while, she said, we made up our mind. She said, we're better off upstairs under the table. I said, what the... You see, in other words, live dangerously, but live. Whereas downstairs with everybody else, being treated, there's your number, there's your unit. We're all a collection of people, a society. She preferred, as I presume is going on in Syria tonight, and in the Congo, and right around the world. When I look at that Al Jazeera thing, and I see how little so many of us have, and yet they're smiling. They've got nothing. And yet they've got community. And the Aussies are banging on about how badly off we are. You know, we have to go revisit, I mean, what does it mean to be a baby? What does it mean to be a child? What does it mean to be a teenager? What does it mean? What's wrong with us? It's obvious. We're here, I presume we're spiritual beings having a human experience. And we better get on with it. And the only way to get on with it is to share it together. And then your blue pill, you've already had it. Because you've died and gone to heaven. Isn't it? But have it by all means, but I mean, as long as it doesn't become compulsory. It's a free country, isn't it?
Well, I think that's on those words of wisdom, a good point to finish. I think that the idea that we can have a lot more fun, be a lot more adventurous. We can aim to make heaven on earth, build those community links that enable us to help each other. I think there's as well as Brian suggested, think a bit more creatively about how we use our collective wealth through the tax system to build the sorts of services that we're going to need as we do get older. And
make the churches share their real estate.
All right.
Because I remember before we were extradited, we ended up with 42 units of community housing built on parish land. And to me, that was the greatest achievement of 40 years there, that a church would actually have to face that for the next 90 or 100 years, whatever the lease is. And I can't for the life of me see, after 150 years of privilege and having been given rate-free occupation of land, that the churches now shouldn't be expected to share that privilege by providing community housing for various, you know what I mean?
Thank you, Father Bob. So thank you to the City of Melbourne staff who've helped to create tonight's event, particularly to Melbourne Conversations maestro Jeff Taylor and to Jane Foley and Andrew Quick from the City of Melbourne's Community Services. Thank you too, as the audience, for attending tonight, and thank you above all to our speakers, Sue Hendy, Brian Howe, Marion Lau, Collette Browning and Father Bob. Thank you very much.